Saying his goodbyes to his family, Jesus went with his uncle to Qumran, where they stayed while they prepared to leave, and once everything was finalized, they set out for the port city of Tiberias, and soon found themselves on the high seas sailing to Britain. It was during these weeks at sea that Jesus was visited by an angel in his dream, informing him of why God chose Mary as his mother. Mary, the angel said, was Eve reborn, placed in a new body to atone for the sins she incurred in Eden so long ago. He himself was the reincarnation of Adam. He had lived several times before, firstly as Adam, then as the prophet Enoch, Melchizedek, king of Salem, Jerusalem, in the time of Abraham, Joseph the son of Jacob, Joshua ben Nun, the leader of the Israelites after Moses, Asaph, a prophet in Solomon's court, and as the high priest of Israel, who helped bring the Jews back into their homeland after the Babylonian exile. Each life he atoned for the sins he committed in Eden. And this life, the angel said, would be his greatest challenge. It would not be easy, but, as we all do, Jesus had free will and could reject his calling as a prophet. But, if he did, the cycle would continue. How the young boy handled such heavy information we can only speculate, but it did not, as we know, dissuade him from accepting his calling. A few weeks later, Jesus and his uncle landed in Cornwall, where they were warmly received by the locals. They stopped in the village of Minvar, where the two stayed for a while. Here, so stories handed down through the centuries say, Jesus drank from the village well, which can still be seen and visited today. After staying some time in Minvar and sharing meals and conversations with the miners who worked Joseph's mines, the two Jews continued on further into Britain, where they met with Joseph's son-in-law Bran. As Archdruid Bran was the head of the Druids on the island, from the northern reaches of Scotland to the mountains of Wales, he was recognized as a man with deep connections to the gods and the spirits of nature. The British religion at this time, known to us today as Celtic, was based on the belief that all things in nature, from the tiniest of insects to the greatest tree, had a soul. Ancient Britons believed that each river had its own god or goddess, that every tree and stone housed a spirit of some kind or another. Elves and fairies were commonly believed in, as was the belief in reincarnation and magic, and the Druids, keepers of their people's religious knowledge, were among the most well-learned and wise men in all of Europe. Bran brought his father-in-law and Jesus to the modern English county of Somerset, to Inisimong's, a Druid community, at what is now the site of Glastonbury Abbey, which would later become famous for being the final resting place of Arthur Pendragon. Inisimong's, later to be moved to the Isle of Anglesey in Wales, after the Roman invasion of 43 AD, was the headquarters, so to speak, of Druidic learning in the British Isles. People from across the Celtic world, from Ireland, Gaul, and even Asia came there to study the ways of the Druids, a spiritual path that stretched back thousands of years to the arrival of Brutus of Troy and his followers, when ancient Greek, Israelite, and Hittite religious traditions blended together with the religion and spiritual practices of the natives of what would become Britain. Jesus spent months studying at Inisimong's, while his uncle traveled across the British countryside, conducting trade deals and meeting important nobles who could help make his business more profitable. This time with the Druids gave him knowledge and spiritual insight he would later incorporate into his teachings, including the belief in reincarnation shown when Jesus told his disciples that John the Baptist, his cousin who we shall meet later, was Elisha the prophet. Elijah, of course, died in 849 BC, centuries before their lifetime.